everybody. I am so excited to be here. I had no idea I would be following the most incredible women with businesses that I have known and inspired. I'm Southern, and every woman I know who was a strong model of entrepreneurship for me was a Mary Kay woman, so that was a very big moment for me. I'm here today because I am so excited to be talking about my favorite topic. I'm talking about women in business, why they're so important and what they add to your team. So today I'm going to be talking about not just why these women are so important and what makes them the ideal team members. I'm going to talk about what I've learned from my 14 years of researching and speaking with women in business about what they want, both at a big picture level and at a small, everyday, granular level, and how you can create those environments to attract them to your companies, and not just attract them, but to really get them invested and to get them to stay for a long time. So this was the book that started it all for me. And I spent the first 12 years of my business writing about design online. I was 23 years old when I started my blog. I'm almost 37 now. And I just wanted to talk about design all day, and I loved it, and that's what I did. But one of the things that I really wanted to know was the stories behind the people. And so with this book project, I got to do that. In the course of just 2 months, I traveled to interview over 100 women all across the country to talk about their lives, to talk about their hopes, their dreams, what they really wanted out of their jobs, how they made things happen. And I digested this into this one book. And I wanted it to be a diverse representation of just how varied and vast the community of talented women is, and how different their points of view are, and how different their experiences are. And I've digested those into this talk today. But first I want to tell you a little bit about how I got started. So I moved to Brooklyn, New York in 2003 from Virginia, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I had a printmaking degree, which good luck finding a job with that degree. I had no idea what to do, but I knew that I loved creative people. I tried any way I could to get my foot in the creative world. I worked for a record industry. I worked for a public relations company that worked with designers and big mid-century furniture companies. I just wanted to learn more and figure out what the options were. But at that point in my life, there were not a lot of women in positions of management. I didn't know what those careers would look like. So I ended up having to kind of find my own way there. So what that looked like was, in 2003, I opened up a free Blogspot account. That's what this looked like back in 2003. And I started talking about the things that I loved. I was carrying a little portable camera around. This was before phones had cameras on them. And I would walk around in Brooklyn. I would find student design shows. I would find open warehouses where people were making cool things out of reclaimed materials, and just take pictures. And I talked about them. I interviewed people. I started a podcast in 2003 before I even knew what that was or what would happen with it. And I just started talking to people and writing about it. And I thought this would be my digital online resume that would maybe one day get me the dream job that I really wanted. I wanted a stable job at a magazine. I wanted a company to be a part of, and I wanted collaboration and coworkers. And I didn't realize that this blog would end up becoming the career I didn't know that I could have. But I wanted to talk about this one point because I think a lot of times when we talk about creative women, those who are entrepreneurs, those that are freelancers, we forget that so many of them very much want to be a part of a company. There isn't this huge divide between entrepreneurs and creatives and freelancers and those people that work for larger companies. They very much want the stability and the team and the collaboration that comes with being a part of a company. And so that moment that I had of wanting to be there and wanting this to be my resume to one day get a different job is a very common sentiment among women. So this was the first layout of my blog, and as I grew up with the site, so did the site. We changed to different designs. I added team members. I talked about new topics. We covered everything from furniture design and interior design to business and DIY projects. And we really tried to embrace this kind of young do-it-yourself moment that was happening in America. And as I got older, the site got a little simpler. And this is what it looks like right now. This is 2018. The site is white and simple, and it's all about letting the content shine. Because over the past 14 years, I've come to realize something incredibly important, which is I can talk about things and stuff and beautiful objects and things that are gorgeous that we all like to go get in line in museums and see. But at the end of the day, I am far more interested in the people and the stories behind those products than I ever will be the products themselves. After 14 years, I realized that just writing this blog was no longer going to keep me inspired and excited to do more. I wanted to know what made these people tick. I wanted to know how they got through the toughest points of their lives. How did they hit those roadblocks, learn more, and become a better business owner? And the way I decided to learn these lessons was to just DIY bootstrap my way through this. I looked into my bank account, which was quite small, and figured out what could I afford to spend to get myself across country. So I picked 8 cities where I had friends that had couches that I could sleep on. And I took myself to 8 cities, and I worked with local experts, everybody who volunteered their time, people who were experts in wholesaling, pricing, public relations, marketing, and I invited anybody who could get there who was a woman who wanted to run or was already running their own business to come and learn and connect. And what that looked like was about 1,000 women meeting up together, eating a lot of cupcakes, and sitting down and talking about all of the really scary things that happen when you're a woman in business. We talked about everything from sexual harassment and assault to how to market your next product and how to figure out how to stay relevant. This was the single most impactful moment for me in realizing that these conversations and these connections between women were absolutely fundamental to their business success. And one thing I realized when I had those meetings, which were great, I loved them, was that I wasn't accessing enough people. This was information that absolutely deserved to be in the hands of every woman who wanted to run her own business or even thought about turning something into a side project. So I took that message to a larger level. And in 2012, I launched my first radio podcast called After the Jump. So in blog lingo, the jump is the point at which a post you're reading expands to deeper conversation. It's when you have to click a read more link. And so for me, the name of the podcast was really about how do we get down to those nitty granular, very uncomfortable discussions that are all about life and work. And so for the course of 2 years and over 100 episodes and about a million listeners per episode, I interviewed mostly women across the country about how they got their businesses off the ground and what they had learned and what they were hoping to do. And I loved this. I learned so much. I got to hear so much reader feedback about things they wanted us to talk about. But when I looked back at my 2 years of coverage, I realized that I had made a mistake. And it was a lesson I would continue to learn over and over again, and one that I think it's important for all of us to think about, which was when I chose my interview subjects, I was pulling from a pretty narrow pool. I felt really proud that I was pulling women and thought that was great. But when I looked back, I was primarily only pulling white women, women of a certain age, women from a certain financial background, and women who were able-bodied and mostly straight. And when I looked back, I realized this is not the majority of my community. The majority of my community comes from very different backgrounds. They have very different experiences, and I've really missed out on that. So I decided to write this book as a way to work towards fixing that problem that I had made. I wanted to sit down and have a visual celebration and dedication to just how diverse and exciting our community really is. And so I traveled across the country, interviewed these women, and I chose them based on a number of factors. But I primarily wanted people to see that women in business, there is no age you have to be, there is no background you have to have, and there is not one way to business. There are a number of ways to start a company. It does not have to start with venture capital money. It does not have to start perfectly after college. You can start a new business when you're 65 that takes off and makes you feel fulfilled. I really wanted to illustrate all of these different paths to business. And throughout the book, we featured these women in their studio spaces, in their homes, in their offices, and asked them the same 10 set of questions. And while their answers ranged all over the place and reflected their diverse backgrounds, there were some common lessons. And I learned those lessons even more in depth when I decided to go on the road and turn this book into a book tour. And I traveled to over 16 different cities and met with over 4,000 women. And I was so excited about this because this was the place where these conversations turned to in real life moments. You can write a book and you can work on the internet, and for those of you who work on the internet, you probably know those connections are harder. It's harder to connect with people when you don't get to see and sit down and look at them face to face. And when we were listening to the Mary Kay speech, I was so excited to hear about that moment of looking at somebody in the eyes and feeling heard and understood. And that's incredibly crucial, not just for women, but especially for women, because we are historically overlooked and underheard and underappreciated. And during this book tour, I got to have thousands of those moments with women who said, thank you for telling a story and showing a picture of somebody who looks like me and makes me feel like my business and my goals are important and valid. And this community that sprung up from this book and all tended to kind of congregate around this hashtag we started for it, took on a life of its own entirely. I have so little to do with it anymore, and that is a beautiful thing, because these women have created their own meetup groups, they've started collaborations together, they've started whole businesses together, they have supported and uplifted each other in a way that I could not have even imagined. And the thing that I think is so relevant to us here today is that so many of these women spoke about feeling validated that they still had company or day jobs or side jobs that were really important and meaningful to them. And they felt like for their creative businesses to be taken seriously, they couldn't have these company jobs. That somehow made them less creative or talented than everybody else. And so one of the reasons I wanted to highlight women in this book who still had and loved jobs with larger companies was I thought it was important for people to know that that's an important option, and it's a valid one. And the creative skills you have in your side project can absolutely be beneficial to the work you do with a company. So here are some of the lessons that I've learned from these women from a wide range of ages, places in life, and places in their career. What I want you to know about these women, first and foremost, these are women that do not quit. Women who are entrepreneurs do not give up. We have historically heard the word no more times than you can imagine. And we've not only gotten through that, we have learned to thrive because of that. Women have heard no, we've heard we can't do things, we've heard no woman has done that before, so you definitely can't be the first to do that. But this is an entire book and an entire movement of women who have single-handedly proved that wrong. And this is why you want these people on your team. They are people who are constantly evolving. They are pushing themselves harder, and they're not just pushing themselves harder, they're pushing the women around them harder. They're pushing all of their teammates around them to be better, to do better, and to make their entire company better. This is Miriam Pare. She's an artist. She is a quadriplegic and paints with a paintbrush in her mouth. And the things that she has been able to do, in both an artistic and on a human level, are awe-inspiring. And in the book, she said that creative women see opportunities in everything, and they push boundaries. And that is spot on. When you have spent your life being told that you're not enough or that you can't do something just because you're a woman, you learn how to turn that into a strength. Now, Debbie Millman is something of a legend in the New York area. She is a beloved graphic designer and a professor in New York City. And she made a really important point that I want you all to remember, which is that so many talented creative women do not let busy stand in their way. If you want something done, give it to a busy woman. We know how to multitask. We know how to be working parents. We know how to get things done when someone, whether it's a child or an employee, is asking you 10 different questions. These are the women who know how to multitask and not only get things done, but do it wonderfully. So what do these people want from a company? What do they want from their job? What makes them happy? What makes them feel fulfilled? The single most important thing you can do at a company is to create a supportive work environment where people feel happy for years to come. There are a lot of ways to do that, but creativity and support from management were the single biggest things I heard from people. That was what they wanted, was a place where they felt like they were always going to be pushing boundaries, they were going to be thinking of solutions in creative ways. They wanted that creativity there, and they also wanted to be supported. So what does that support actually look like on a day-to-day level and at a big picture level? The first thing you need to do is to create spaces where open dialogue is encouraged. Dialogue was the biggest sticking point for the women that I interviewed. So many of them were used to not being able to be heard, not being listened to, not being taken seriously. They wanted places to talk about things openly and honestly. And in the era of Me Too and Time's Up, we all know a little too well just how common it is for women to not only be held back and not listened to, but to not be taken seriously. So to create a space where dialogue is not just allowed, but is encouraged, and is encouraged at all levels without a million hurdles to get through of paperwork and people you have to be approved by in order to get your concern heard, that is a huge factor for most women. And not only does management need to be able to listen to these women, they need to be able to understand where they're coming from. And intersectionality is a huge thing for most women in business, which means they want management and they want companies that understand all of the levels of the way that their identity affects their position at work, whether that's their race, their age, their sexual orientation, their ability level, whatever that is. They want a company and a management and an HR department that understands their point of view and their experience in life. They don't expect you to know it offhand, but they do want you to be able to consider those factors so that when group discussion happens, you understand how people's identities and backgrounds affect their experience at work. And the other thing that was important to them that I'm so glad to discuss, because everyone has mentioned it here today, and it's something that Oracle does well, is encouraging hobbies and side projects. I didn't expect this, but it was something women talked about constantly, was how important those hobbies were to them. This is Jessica Nicole. She's an actress, a filmmaker, a designer. You might recognize her from the TV show Fringe. I interviewed her for the book, and she said, the world needs more people with hobbies. Incorporating activities from our lives that bring joy can be beneficial to us, our work, and the people around us. I thought this was so important to point out because Oracle has an internal talent marketplace, and projects and programs like that are huge selling points to creative women because they want to know that you see those skills, that creative talent, and that you know that that can be applied and appreciated in the work that they do. So another big issue with women was corporate burnout. This was something everybody mentioned, and to be quite honest, I'm not sure if most people had actually experienced it so much as the myth and the fear of it. So many women mentioned how they were very concerned about having to stay late, they're not having time to be respected as a working mother, all of the various issues that face women, they were very concerned about burning out. And frankly, many of them said, if I'm going to have to work late hours and do this all on my own, why not just start my own company? So knowing that there's corporate culture that encourages people to take care of themselves, that understands the needs of working mothers, that's an incredibly important point for these women. So how do these function on a day-to-day basis? And what are the changes that you can make internally to make sure people feel these big picture changes at an everyday company level? The first thing you should do is make sure collaboration is a huge part of day-to-day relations. One of the selling points that companies have that entrepreneurs and women working on their own will never really have in the same way is the opportunity for in-person collaboration. The single biggest thing that women said they missed about working on their own was not having people to collaborate with in person. They missed running into people in a lunchroom. They missed working on projects together and the excitement and all of the sort of, the conduits for exciting new things that come from those in-person interactions. So if you are able to influence and have people have these sort of connected moments, that is a really big thing for enticing these people to come work with you. So in addition to collaboration and really encouraging this back and forth dialogue, a big part of that connection was mentorship. How many of you out here have formal mentorship programs at your companies? That is awesome to see. That is a huge thing to push with anyone that you would like to be a new hire or to keep as part of your team. If you don't have a program now, talk to your team members and figure out how to make one that works for them. Mentorship was something that every single woman cited that either one person they had worked with or one person in their life was that tipping point that gave them the excitement, the confidence, the motivation to follow their dreams and do something that they wanted. This is Thelma Golden. She's the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem in New York City. She said, I love seeing brilliant creative women making space and laying down tracks for other women. This was a common sentiment among the women that I interviewed, was that it was incredibly important for them to see women who looked like them making room and making space for each other. And not just making room for them, but helping them up, helping them with promotions and helping them see where they could grow at a company. Karen Young is an entrepreneur in New York City who's run 4 or 5 different companies in her very short time as an entrepreneur. And she talked a lot about connections and how these needed to be authentic. They couldn't be things that were just shoved together. It needed to be corporate culture that understood how these things happened over time and organically, and to provide and build structures into your workday that allowed for these collaborations to happen. And one thing that's particular to creative women, and it's really important to know if you are hiring people who are a part of this creative community, women want to know that you're not going to shave off their edges, the things that make them a little bit different, maybe a little bit edgy, that make them approach problem solving in a completely different way. They want to know they get to be themselves at work. This is hugely important, especially when you're dealing with artistic people coming to work for a company. They want to know that they're not going to be absorbed into a faceless corporate culture. They want to know that you are a mix of individuals with different ideas, different styles, and different ways of approaching things. This is Janet Mock. She's an activist, and she said, we're trained to fit in, assimilate, and blend in, and she is so enamored of people who can do that. This is one of the biggest things I hear online and in social media every single day, is how important it is to see someone who looks like you, who hasn't had to become somebody else, who's doing well. They want to hear positive feedback. They want to hear you appreciate these unique qualities, which is great. And they also want to hear feedback that isn't always positive. One of the things I found unique to this group of women, and perhaps that's their kind of shared artistic background, is they are open to constructive criticism. In addition to missing out on collaboration in offices, these women really wanted to know how they could be better, how that they could learn and do things through your company work that they wouldn't get on their own. So many of us working on our own miss having editors and bosses and people who have regular reviews so that we can figure out how to become better, more efficient, more creative, more talented. We want these opportunities. So in addition to being praised for the things that make us different and make us great team members, they're also completely open to regular feedback. That sort of feedback was a really big talking point. And the last thing I wanted to mention in this section was travel. I'm so glad that you talked about corporate travel trips. Whether that is a trip around the block or a trip to a different country, the thing that people talked about a lot was really missing out on chances to be inspired through travel. This is Sheila Bridges. She's one of the most successful interior designers working in America today. And she repeatedly, like so many women, mentioned that travel was the thing that made her want to work every morning. Whether that was going to a place in her neighborhood and meeting somebody new, or traveling to meet a client in a different company, a different country, she wanted that opportunity. And this is something that you as companies can offer us that we cannot do on our own as entrepreneurs. None of us have budgets for travel. None of us have budgets to go see the people that do the things that inspire us, or even the people that we work for or sell things to. You have those opportunities. If you take advantage of them and give a wide range of your employees the chance to travel and be inspired, it's a great way to keep people long term. So I'm so glad that this is an unexpected coincidence that we all have the same talking point about communities and giving back. But this is, and you guys were spot on, this was the #1 thing that I continue to hear to this day on social media under the hashtag that relates to this book, is how many people care very little about how much money they make, although that is important. They care much more about being attached to a company and an ethos that's about giving back to the people around them. Everybody said, I would happily take a smaller paycheck, work a little bit overtime, just to be a part of something that I felt was making a huge, huge difference. And obviously this is a big deal to women. I think we're so used to historically being overlooked and underappreciated and being part of a group of people that have to work a little bit harder to get things done. And I think that gives us a sense of empathy and compassion for people who need within our community. And so everybody cited that this was one way that companies could stand out from each other, was to highlight the things you do internally, whether it's a company softball game that raises money for a charity that's local, to huge national or international programs. They want to know about these projects immediately. In some cases, it's almost more important than the details of your team culture. They want to know how your business uses its time, its resources, and its people to give back and to really enhance that sense of community. And part of that community is connected to the idea of passion. This is Tanya Aginiga. She is an activist and an artist who lives in Los Angeles, and she does work with people crossing over the border near Tijuana, and she documents stories, and that's a big part of her work. And she said for her, success was all about doing work that celebrated inclusivity and her community, and that she couldn't imagine doing any work either on her own or with somebody else that didn't connect and make the community around her stronger. Mary Lambert is a singer. She said passion connects the community in this same way. And I think this is what's missing in a lot of the things that connect artists and creative women to wonderful company jobs, is knowing that that spark of passion and understanding that what makes someone passionate about a cause or something in their personal life is something that can make them a great employee or a great team member. So finding ways to highlight that and connect to that are incredibly important. So how do you communicate this when you're talking to a new hire or reaching out to somebody or just trying in general to re-motivate and inspire the people who are working with you who fall into this community? There are a couple different ways. The first thing is to really take time to make all of these things clear. And you make it clear by telling them programs that exist, programs you're open to starting. You give them examples of people who are a part of your community and your company that are happy, successful, and who've been upwardly mobile. They need to see themselves reflected. If you have a mentorship program, absolutely lead with that. That is a huge factor. It makes women feel seen and represented and like growth is possible. The other thing to think about is that you offer something as a company that entrepreneurs can't get. And if they do get, it's learned pretty expensively. Diana Yen, who is an event planner in New York City, explained this well. She talked about business being incredibly difficult for her. She was somebody who liked to cook, someone who liked to throw parties, but she had to learn a lot of very expensive lessons at her own cost because she had no business experience. She didn't have marketing experience. When you are looking to hire somebody, point this out. Talk to them about all of the unique skills that your company offers them, chances to grow and learn that they would not be able to have on their own. This is something that people don't talk about enough, and I think sometimes it becomes a little competitive between entrepreneurs and working at a company, but you as companies have budgets and experience and opportunities that we could never dream of as people working on our own. And so for you to take time to highlight the specific set of skills that we will get working with your company is a very big deal. Lastly, and most importantly, these women want to know that you are going to grow with them. We as women are constantly evolving. We are constantly changing. We are hearing new stories and new experiences that shape and change the way we feel about things. And we want to know that the companies we work with and where we devote our time and our work are going to do the same thing with us. Over and over again, when I spoke with women, one of their biggest fears about taking jobs with other companies was, will they allow me to grow as a human being with them? And will they do the same? Or will we have the same goals and the same needs every year? They really want to know that companies evolve. And I think so often when you're talking about people in the entrepreneurship community, and especially creative people, they have this idea that companies don't change, that companies kind of have the same plan and the same company ethos that they work with for decades and decades. And yes, it's good to have company goals that you stay with and the values that you hold on to, but they also want to see the ways in which you evolve. So when you're talking to these people and you're sitting down with them and you're talking face to face, let them know the ways in which you've changed over the years, how you've responded to customer feedback, how you've evolved based on what your team members need and want. That evolution is incredibly important. The future of creativity at every level and of businesses at every level is absolutely about growing, and not just for yourself as a company, not just for the individual, but so everybody performs at their best level. And the only way we do that is when we push each other, when we collaborate, and when we hear each other. So thank you so much for having me, and thanks for listening.